as we can go, but keep in mind that the average price
of this morning, the Indian Air Force struck the biggest training camp of Jaish-e-Mohammed in Balakot, Pakistan. In an official statement, the Ministry of External Affairs has made it clear that this was a strike against Jaish-e-Mohammed training camp. It was a preemptive strike in the light of credible information of terror strikes planned in different parts of India. It was a non-military strike, which means the target was not the Pakistani military but the terror camp, and the choice of target was such so that there were no civilian casualties. Pakistan, while admitting the strike, has claimed little or no damage, while threatening to retaliate as well. Now, India has also made it a point to ensure that no civilians were targeted in this, and that's an important part of the statement which has come out. There's a lot of information today out there on the strike. We here at Bloomberg Quint have made an effort to cross-reference and check all of the information out there and put that out for you. You will see that in graphics during the course of the show. But today on Primetime Debate, we look at the details emerging on the operation by the Indian Air Force and the possible escalation of the situation. Speaking to me on this today is former Foreign Secretary and, of course, seasoned diplomat Lalit Mansingh. I'm speaking with Pushan, who's Program Coordinator at ORF, and Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director of the Asia Program, Woodrow Wilson. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for speaking with us here at Bloomberg Quint today. Mr. Mansingh, let me start by asking you about the nature of the strike that India has conducted. There has been a lot of commentary today pointing out that this is the first time since 1971 that the Indian Air Force has gone across the LOC into Pakistan and conducted a strike. And this changes the rules of the game, so to speak. Can you elaborate on that and give me your view on whether you really think this is a departure from how India has handled terror strikes on our armed forces in the past?
Well, first of all, let me say that the armed forces of India have performed brilliantly. They have delivered a strike which is precise, proportionate, and professional. There is no question that it was meticulously planned and executed with minimal collateral damage, and it was pinpointed on a terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan. But the significance of this strike is that it marks the end of the policy of strategic restraint by India. If you go back to 1998 and the nuclear tests that both India and Pakistan conducted, India took the line that with both countries possessing nuclear weapons, it was not possible to engage in conflict hereafter. But the Pakistanis decided that it gave them an opportunity to do asymmetrical attacks on India through cross-border terrorism without India having the capacity to retaliate because it could escalate. This bluff has been called for the first time by India, and India has made it clear that retaliation will follow, and our strategic restraint should not be regarded as weakness. We took a policy decision during Kargil that the Indian armed forces would not cross the line of control, and it was meticulously observed. But in the surgical strikes, India took the step of crossing the LOC in a shallow attack on territory under Pakistan's governance, but technically belonging to India. But today, the attack was Pakistan's territory. The message is loud and clear that if you continue with cross-border terrorism, retaliation will follow, and territories in Pakistan will not be spared. I think that's a message which both Pakistan and the international community have to understand.
Okay, Michael Kugelman, I want to welcome you to the show and also understand what happens next. There is a statement from the Foreign Secretary of India which talks about Balakot, but does not pinpoint exactly where. There are two locations named Balakot, in Pakistan and one in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Secondly, the response from Pakistan, where they first said that, okay, the Indian Air Force did come in, but nothing much happened. Then they said that we will also retaliate. How do you read into the statements coming in from India and Pakistan?
Well, it's sort of like deja vu. It reminds me a lot of what happened after the surgical strike in September 2016, right? I mean, you have this assertion coming from India that something really big was done, and then the Pakistanis have sort of tried to downplay and at times seemingly deny before sort of coming out with a rather inconsistent response as to reaction as to what had happened. I think that the messaging from the Pakistani leadership, to me, suggests that the notion of an imminent, visible retaliation by the Pakistanis is probably quite unlikely. I do think that what Pakistan could certainly try to do, and this would not be anything new, is simply double down on its embrace of these non-state militant actors like Jaish-e-Mohammed that it's looked to for many years to try to punish India in ways that Pakistan's conventional military forces cannot, because they're inferior to those of India. It was not surprising that the Pakistani statements today have been rather vague. I think, quite frankly, that they probably don't know what they want to do just yet. But the fact that from pretty early on you had what seemed to be an effort to downplay what happened, and that to me suggests that they're not in a position, they don't have willingness or capacity to respond in a very muscular and visible way. So, we'll see. But I do think at the least that what we would have to...
Yeah, one marked difference though, Michael, because you said this was a lot like, the first round of surgical strikes after the attack in Uri. But there's one marked difference, isn't there? There, Pakistan for the first few days was denying it even happened. Here, actually, the first information of sorts came from the Pakistani side, from a Twitter handle from a general in the Pakistani army, who came out and said that, yes, India did come in. Though, of course, what he said was that India came in, but, they had to go back and they dropped the payload hastily and nothing really happened. But that's very different from what happened the last time round, isn't it, Michael?
No, it is, absolutely. I don't want to overstate the similarities. And clearly, I think the biggest difference, if once the details really become clear, is the location of this strike. I mean, there has been confusion as to which Balakot was where this operation actually happened. If indeed this operation did happen in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, if it did not happen in Kashmir, that would really be some type of new precedent, I think. And I think that would really be quite worrisome and alarming to the Pakistani military, much more alarming than what you had in 2016, which essentially amounted to a limited airstrike along the border. But if we're talking about Indian aircraft going over the border, over Kashmir, into KPK, launching the strike and then getting out of there, that's very significant. It would be embarrassing and concerning for the Pakistani military. So I see that as the real major difference between what's happened today and what happened in 2016.
Pushan Das, I want to welcome you to the conversation. Our first two speakers have spoken about how significant it is if this was deep inside Pakistani territory, and at least why reports seem to suggest that they are. There's been no official confirmation of that, I must add, because in the Foreign Secretary's statement, he just says Balakot. Do you think that means India is ready for further escalation, or are we counting on the fact that Pakistan will not want to escalate?
See, there are two things. Firstly, are we ready for further escalation? What sort of escalation? If you look at the Pakistani Foreign Ministry's statement today, it said, I think one of the key words that stood out to me was they would look for an appropriate response. Now, an appropriate response would be on a strike on a similar camp on Indian territory. But of course, such camps don't exist. So, what would their choice of target be? Would it be a military installation? But I think the key takeaway from that point is, there was always, like Ambassador Singh mentioned, because we were so afraid that the red lines were so low in the Pakistani case, if to go to nuclear war or whatever. I think we've created a space for conventional strikes or for conventional conflict under the nuclear umbrella. To what degree it will escalate, we will have to see as this progresses. But I think there's space that has been created from the Indian side to retaliate at least proportionately to terrorist strikes which emanate from Pakistan.
I want to actually come back to Mr. Lalit Mansingh on that statement, and that's an important one. So far, we held back because, these are both nuclear-armed states. Does that mean our tolerance level has grown, or we're assuming that Pakistan, we're sort of calling their bluff, that they will not escalate beyond a point, which is why I just want to come back to what you made of the Foreign Secretary's statement today. We made it a point to underline that we've hit a terror camp. We've not struck against the Pakistani military. We've ensured that there are no civilian casualties, which would make it difficult for, Pakistan to retaliate without a similar justification, isn't it?
Well, I think you're right. We have called Pakistan's bluff. Pakistan has been assuming that India cannot retaliate because it will lead to escalation. Now, this is where I think this was a smart move by India. As the Foreign Secretary has said, it's a preemptive attack. It is an attack on a terrorist infrastructure. The whole world understands what the terrorist infrastructure is. In fact, in a way, we can argue that we are helping Pakistan to get rid of terrorism because that is also Pakistan's proclaimed policy. Then we have minimized casualties, pinpointed the attacks. So there is no opportunity for Pakistan to justify any escalation because the world understands why India did it. Now remember the kind of diplomatic support we have got from major countries, including the United States. The NSA of the US, John Bolton, saying, we support India's right of self-defense. This was done under the doctrine of self-defense. It was not aggression on Pakistan, although it happened on Pakistani territory. So I think there is greater understanding, and I take it that if Pakistan escalates, taking that as an excuse for escalation, the onus will be on Pakistan and it will be condemned by the international community.
Michael, to come on that, reading of what Pakistan is saying today, they're leaving enough room to maneuver for themselves as well, isn't it, to justify a response which is not major or limit the amount of escalation, because at the end of the day, I don't think anyone wants all-out war between two nuclear-armed states. So by Pakistan saying that, it didn't really make any great impact, and the Pakistan Air Force responded in time, and whatever, whole lot of statements coming out from there. They're leaving enough room for maneuverability as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think this is something that Pakistan will see as an advantage. It's going to try to bring the international community to its side, to try to get other countries to try to help lower tensions, diffuse tensions. And, the question of the United States is very interesting here. As was mentioned before, John Bolton essentially indicated that the U.S. would support efforts by India to defend itself against terrorism, in that call that he had with Ajit Doval. But, the U.S. role is very interesting here. As you know, at this very moment, there are very significant talks going on between U.S. officials and Taliban representatives to end the war in Afghanistan. And the U.S. has been looking to the Pakistanis very closely, looking for their cooperation. So I think that while the U.S., I think, will quietly support what India has done, and that's what John Bolton had suggested earlier, I do not think that the Americans are going to try to throw themselves completely into the camp of India and say that they would welcome any type of act that India may engage in. I do think that the U.S. would want to see tensions diffused. Of course, the question is the Trump administration the right U.S. government to try to play that role? I mean, the question is who they would actually deploy to do that type of thing.
No, that's a valid point. It's also important, and we're showing that on our screens, all the countries that India has briefed, the diplomats from the countries that India has briefed. The Modi government also had an all-party meet, took opposition leaders on board. This has been well calculated, calibrated, and, a planned outcome after the strikes across the border as well. What happens next is what we're asking today. Pushan Das, we did a surgical strike after Uri. This is a second strike by the Air Force this time. The stated purpose, with a reading from the Foreign Secretary's statement, shows that we want to stop terror camps. Clearly, it would be nobody's argument that the Jaish-e-Mohammed camp in Balakot was the only one. Will India wait and watch? Would this be the last one? What is the other range of options we have, towards that stated purpose of ending terrorism which targets India and Indian citizens?
See, firstly, one strike into Pakistani territory to take out a terrorist camp is not going to stop or coerce Pakistan to stop supporting terrorist groups. But by doing the strike, it has now imposed costs on the Pakistani state for supporting terrorist organizations like the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the LAT and a whole other groups. Now it is up to, I think the ball is now in Pakistan's court as to whether they see a cost benefit of risking, Indian strikes into Pakistan territory targeted towards terrorist camps, on a continuous basis. Because from the Indian perspective as well, if you look at 2016, 17 soldiers died and India conducted these shallow surgical strikes. This time, more than 40 CRPF Jawans have died. We have conducted airstrikes. So, from India's perspective as well, we have also set a precedent, and we also, any government, not only the BJP government or any other government, will also have to manage public expectations next time that there's a terrorist strike emanating from Pakistan. So I think doing one strike is a signal. To make the costs heavier on Pakistan, India will have to continuously do this if Pakistan continues supporting terrorist groups which attack Indian troops or Indian territory. So what next? I think India will have to continue playing that coercive card to de-incentivize Pakistan from letting terrorist groups using its territory. And I think that is the key thing out here. So one strike necessarily does not disincentivize Pakistan from not supporting terrorist groups. So whether this becomes part of state policy for India is something that will have to be seen.
A key point there. Michael, what can Pakistan do next? Because the political compulsions that Mr. Das speaks about, of course, exist in Pakistan as well for the Imran Khan government. And for him to say that, hey, we did something as well. What could that be? And to what extent do you think that they will go?
Well, I mean, I think, as was mentioned before, Pakistan has relatively limited options here in terms of conventional military force. I mean, I think that there will be diplomatic efforts, as I said before, to try to bring key countries to its side and to try to quietly, behind the scenes, lower tensions. But it's true that there are domestic political considerations in mind for Pakistan. That clearly India did something. We don't know the full details yet, but it did launch an operation in Pakistan in ways that probably went beyond. That went beyond Kashmir. So there's going to be a need for something to be done. But again, what are the options? And I think those are relatively limited. So I do think what we're most likely to see, unfortunately, is a decision on the part of the Pakistanis to double down on its ties to these militant assets and perhaps encouraging them more aggressively to carry out active operations and attacks inside Kashmir and India more broadly. But again, I think there is a level of indecision in Pakistan. I think that there's sort of a lack of clarity as to what can be done because this is somewhat of a new type of situation that Pakistan is not used to. I think it's going to be very. It's really unclear to me, at least, as to how Pakistan is going to act, and that's why I think what it said in these press conferences today was accurate. That the diplomatic steps will probably come first before they think about military responses. Trying to get the assistance of key friends, like such the Chinese, for example, to try to help in some way. I don't know what that would entail, but. At the end of the day, in my view, I think Pakistan has relatively limited options in terms of how it could respond in a muscular fashion.
Mr. Mansingh, I think one key part of what we've seen over the last few hours to discuss is how the international community has responded. You spoke about the United States. The EU put out a statement saying that we hope there is no escalation on both sides. But there is no country today which is questioning how justifiable India's action was. Does that sort of bolster the actions that we've taken? Are we ready to face some sort of international pressure if there is an escalation? How do you see that portion of this panning out?
Well, I doubt if there will be an escalation, because Pakistan's options, as was just mentioned, are limited. Is Pakistan going to have a major strike in India? I think the international community will accept what India did as a fait accompli. The pressure will be on Pakistan not to escalate. It's not on India, because India is not wanting to escalate. Now, look at Pakistan's options. Pakistan can go to its friends. But if it goes to the United States, remember, the US itself has been attacking terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan. And it's a part of US policy to do that. I don't think they can get much sympathy there. They can turn to their friends in the Middle East. But then we had Prince Mohammed bin Salman here, and he made a very strong statement, and the joint statement actually criticized the terrorist attack which took place in Kashmir. The Pakistanis can turn to the Chinese. But the Chinese have also joined a UN Security Council statement, which also strongly condemns the terrorist attack in Kashmir. So I don't think Pakistan can get much sympathy and support for any kind of retaliatory action against India, because India has made it clear it is not against an attack on Pakistan. It is attacking a terrorist infrastructure, and the international community has agreed that Pakistan itself should be doing it. So I doubt very much if there will be an escalation, and I doubt if the pressure will be on India. But what I think will happen now is that the focus will turn to the UN, and possibly the Chinese veto on naming the Jaish-e-Mohammed and its leader, that I think will be under pressure, because China is now considerably isolated, and the first signal is that it agreed to join the UN statement that was just issued.
Pushan, I think it's important to talk about the details of what we know so far. And like I said in the beginning of the show, we've tried to put together details which are as verifiable and credible about the operation that took place in the early hours of this morning. What have you observed in terms of those details, the fact that the Mirage 2000 was used and what we know so far?
See, I think it's telling that, after the Kargil conflict in '99, when the Mirage 2000 played a key role in helping dislodge Pakistani intruders in Indian territory, 20 years down the line, the Mirage 2000 is still the aircraft of choice for the Indian Air Force. I think it is important to note, while the Indian Armed Forces have done a stellar job in conducting this operation and creating the space for retaliation against terrorist strikes, which we thought we did not have for the last few decades. I think it's important to note that the modernization of the Indian Air Force is still in limbo. They're suffering from force structure issues. They don't have enough squadrons. They're still operating MiG-21s, MiG-27s, which are 30, 40 years old. So I think it's important not to be lulled into a sense of complacency. Generally, military reforms in India always work once we've had a military defeat or a military debacle. So, we modernized our military after the 1962 war. We modernized our military after the Kargil conflict. But ever since then, over the last few years, I think no government has given its due thing to modernize the armed forces. And I think it's important not to get lulled into a sense of complacency by one successful military airstrike.
Well, I'm glad that all of you have come on the show. I want to thank you for all the moderation that you've displayed today, where we look at the facts that have come in and where this could go next. Thank you so much, Lalit Mansingh, Michael Kugelman and Pushan for joining us on Primetime Debate today.